T minus 30 seconds. T minus 15 seconds. T minus 10, 9, 8, 7, 6, 5, 4, 3, 2, 1, ignition. And lift off the Falcon 9, go OneWeb 4.
Vehicle is pitching downrange.
Stage 1 propulsion is nominal.
So at T plus 33 seconds, Falcon 9 has successfully lifted off from Slick 4E at Vandenberg, carrying the 20 Eutelsat OneWeb satellites. During ascent, we tilt or gimbal the engines to turn the rocket horizontally into what we call a gravity turn, to put the rocket on its path to orbit. And moments ago, we throttled the engines down in preparation for max Q, or maximum aerodynamic pressure,
Vehicle is supersonic.
which is coming up in a few seconds.
Max Q.
So we just had max Q, and the rocket typically needs to go 28,000 kilometers per hour, or about 17,500 miles per hour, horizontally in order to avoid being pulled back down to Earth by gravity and get into orbit. Now we have five events coming up in quick succession. MECO, stage SEP, SES-1, and boost back burn, which starts bringing the first stage back to the launch site, and then fairing deployment, when the fairing halves will separate from the second stage. So we have MECO in about 30 seconds from now.
Main engine cut off.
Stage separation confirmed.
MVAC ignition.
Stage 1 boost back startup.
And there you heard and maybe even saw MECO, stage SEP, SES-1, and the start of boost back burn, which will last for just under 1 minute. We have some really awesome views on screen right now. And coming up next, we have fairing separation, which is in a few seconds.
Fairing separation confirmed.
And as you just heard and can see right there, we had confirmation of successful separation of both fairing halves from the second stage. Both of the fairing halves on today's mission are flight proven, with one half flying for its 11th time and the other for its 13th. We will be attempting to retrieve these fairing halves again today once they fall back to Earth using our recovery vessel Go Beyond.
Stage 1 boost back shutdown.
And so we just heard the call out for a successful end of the boost back burn. And the first stage booster is now flying back to Vandenberg Space Force Base for a landing on Landing Zone 4, which is just 1,400 feet away from the launch pad where it took off. It's now T plus 4 minutes and 17 seconds into today's mission, and we're currently in the first of 2 planned MVAC burns before satellite deployment. Just over 6 minutes into flight, you should see the start of our first stage's entry burn. And for the entry burn, we relight 3 M1D engines 1, 5, and 9, which slow down the vehicle as it passes back into the Earth's atmosphere. And we slow down to reduce re-entry forces, which helps us recover and reuse the first stage. During the entry burn, Falcon 9 is decelerating by firing its Merlin engines, but we're still moving really fast. And this causes the vehicle to fly through Merlin's exhaust gases, also known as the rocket's plume, and that deposits a layer of soot on the vehicle surface. And that soot comes from the carbon-based fuel that Falcon 9 burns. The Merlins on the first stage are optimized for sea level, and these achieve 190,000 pounds of thrust during ascent and re-entry. The MVAC engine is optimized for 220,500 pounds of thrust in vacuum, and on your screen you'll notice a shorter nozzle that's attached to the Merlin vacuum engine. And our teams use a shorter nozzle when we don't need as much performance to get the payload to its final destination. But we still fly full-size MVAC nozzles on missions that require a more significant amount of thrust from Stage 2 or ones that contain a heavier payload. Entry burn is going to come up shortly, and so we should be able to see that on Stage 1 when the engines relight.
Stage 1 entry burn startup.
So entry burn has just begun.
Stage 1 entry burn shutdown.
And we just had a good call out for entry burn shutdown. Reusability is key to lowering the cost of spaceflight, which enables more investment in critical scientific research. And the Falcon 9 first stage that is supporting today's mission just performed that entry burn for its 7th time. And this booster has previously supported the USSF-62 mission as well as 5 Starlink missions. We're now waiting for the first stage to land at landing zone 4.
Stage 1 FTS has safed. Stage 1 transonic.
Good call-outs there, where Falcon 9 is slowing. The Stage 1 is slowing down. Landing burn should be coming up shortly.
Stage 1 landing burn.
And there we have the
Stage 2 is
landing
in terminal
burn,
guidance.
where engine 9 has relit right before touching down on the landings at landing zone 4.
Stage 1 landing leg deploy. Stage 1 landing confirmed.
And there you have it. That landing
Stage
marks
2
SpaceX's
FTS
357th recovery of an orbital class rocket, including first stage landings for Falcon 9 and Falcon Heavy. And we are now waiting for second engine cutoff, which is coming up next.
Nominal orbital insertion.
And we just had SECO 1 and good confirmation of nominal orbital insertion. So the second stage is now embarking on its coast phase, which we're going to take a short break for. And after the coast phase, we will relight that MVAC engine for a second time around the T plus 55-minute mark, and that will be followed by payload deploy. So we'll see you back here in about 45 minutes. Welcome back to the Eutelsat OneWeb 20 mission. We've had a great mission so far. Falcon 9 launched on time at 10:13 p.m. Pacific time from Slick 4 East in Vandenberg Space Force Base in California. We had a successful ascent, fairing separation, and second stage orbital insertion. We also recovered the first stage at landing zone 4, which marked its 7th landing. So we're now seconds away from a second ignition of the MVAC, which will carry the second stage and the OneWeb payload into the orbit necessary to deploy the satellites. This burn will be quick, and it's only going to last a couple of seconds. And it's coming up in about 15 seconds from now.
Good orbit insertion.
And there was a good call out there for good orbit. And as a reminder, the 20 OneWeb satellites are still attached to Falcon 9 second stage. Coming up at about T plus 59 minutes is the start of the payload deploy sequence, which should take a little less than 20 minutes to complete. So we'll be listening for the start of those callouts in a few minutes. So now we're just a couple of minutes away from payload deploy, and our initial burn and orbit insertion put us into an elliptical orbit, which is one where the highest point, the apogee, and the lowest point, the perigee of the orbit, are different. And so it put us into a 175 kilometer by 600 kilometer orbit. And that last short burn that we just saw put us into a circular orbit for payload deployment into a 600 kilometer by 600 kilometer orbit. So it turns out from orbital mechanics that a burn along the direction of travel raises the opposite side of the ellipse, which is why we took that burn at apogee to raise the perigee. So now that we've completed both of those burns today, we are now just a few minutes away from the first payload deploy, where we will be deploying 10 of the satellites, and then we'll be taking a short break and come back for the final 10 satellites on this payload. As a reminder, our customer today is Eutelsat Group, which operates a fleet of 35 geostationary satellites and a constellation of more than 600 satellites in low Earth orbit to deliver broadcast and connectivity services worldwide. The 20 OneWeb LEO satellites launching today were built by Airbus U.S. Space and Defense in Merritt Island, Florida. And once deployed, they will continue to raise their orbit over the coming months and will be integrated into the OneWeb LEO constellation. So we should start seeing deployment of the first 20 Eutelsat of the first 10 of the 20 Eutelsat OneWeb satellites in the next few seconds here.
Sat A4 and A8 have been deployed.
So we just had deployment of the first 2 satellites of this batch of 10, and the next 2 will be deployed in about 30 seconds from now.
Sat A3 and A7 have been deployed.
Good call out there for the next pair that have just deployed. So far we have deployed 4 out of the 10 satellites in this first payload deployment, and we're waiting
Sat
for...
A2 and A6 have been deployed.
And there we just heard the next pair have been deployed, so there's 4 more remaining.
Sat A1 and Sat A5 have been deployed.
Another good call out there. So there are 2 more satellites that remain to be deployed in this initial set of 10. They should be deploying in about a minute.
Sat B4 and B8 have been deployed.
And great call outs there. So we've now deployed 10 out of the 20 satellites, and we now have a second roughly 10-minute coast phase, which we're going to take another short break for. And after the coast phase, we'll be back to deploy the remaining 10 satellites just after the T plus 1 hour and 12-minute mark. So we'll see you back here in about 10 minutes. Welcome back to the final portion of the Eutelsat OneWeb 20 mission. So far, we have had a great mission with an on-time launch of Falcon 9 at 10:13 p.m. Pacific time from Slick 4E at Vandenberg Space Force Base in California. We had a successful ascent, fairing separation, and second stage orbital insertion. And we also recovered the first stage at Landing Zone 4 for its 7th landing. And about 10 minutes ago, we deployed the first 10 satellites on today's mission. And now we are about to start deploying the last 10. And similar to the first set of deployments, these will be deployed in pairs. So even though we don't have views of satellite deployment yet, we will still get confirmation over the nets until we regain camera views. So we are currently standing by for those callouts, and we will share them as soon as we hear them. We should be coming up on signal acquisition shortly.
Sat B1 and B5 separation confirmed.
Good callouts there for the first two of this batch of 10.
Sat B2 and B6 separation confirmed.
And a great view of that pair deploying. So far we've now deployed a total of 14 of the 20 satellites aboard today's mission. We have an awesome view on our screen right now, but even if we lose views of satellite deployment, we will still continue to get confirmation.
Sat C1 and C5 separation confirmed.
And another two have deployed, and we got an awesome view of that deployment as well. So now there are 4 more satellites that remain to be deployed, and we have successfully deployed 16 out of the 20 so far. The satellites that you see on your screen right now were built by
Sat B3 and B7 separation confirmed.
another successful deployment of 2 more satellites. These satellites were built by Airbus U.S. Space and Defense in Merritt Island, Florida. And so now there are the final 2 satellites that remain to be deployed from the set of 20.
Sat C3 and C7 separation confirmed.
So with the final 2 on their way, we can confirm successful
All payloads
deployment.
deployed.
We can now confirm successful deployment of all 20 spacecraft on today's mission. And that wraps up our coverage for today. Today's launch concludes our 99th successful launch this year and our 394th overall. All of us here at SpaceX want to give a huge thanks to our customer, Eutelsat Group, for entrusting us with today's mission. We also want to thank the Range and the Federal Aviation Administration for their support. Be sure to follow us at SpaceX on X for upcoming launch updates. And to all of our viewers, thanks for tuning in, and we'll see you again soon.